All right. I'm going to jump right in because I don't want to waste any minutes. So. And less than as terrorists, and also for more, I mean, you know, I look at Jaspal Singh's terrorist assemblages. As menacing terrorists, while Sikh women are literally being erased through killings and dying for Sikh communal honor and also from narrative space. Miriam Hirsch and Valerie Smith argue, quote, what a culture remembers and what it chooses to forget are intricately bound up with issues of power and hegemony, and thus with gender, close quote. Thus, many writers and film directors elide Sikh female violence and rape, leading to erasures and invisibility in media and literary narratives. And for me, that is, disallowing memory, disallowing healing to occur. Anyway, I'll talk about this as I go along. Veena Das, in Life and Words, Violence and the Descent into the Ordinary, acknowledges mass rapes that occurred during the partition, yet her narrative elides the same occurring during the 1984 massacre. She states, quote, in contrast to the partition, if we consider the riots against the Sikh in 1984, the dominant theme were those of humiliation of men. Women were not attacked, though there might have been a few isolated cases of rape. Yeah, a few. Studies of communal violence in other areas suggest that in some cases, and this is still the quote, Hindus and Muslims groups consciously tried to avoid rape of women of the other community, close quote. Das is unable to name, quote, that died when autonomous citizens of India were simultaneously born as monsters, but who claim it was on the register of the imaginary that the question of what could constitute the passion of those who occupied this unspeakable and unhearable zone of gender violence was given shape by men, quote, who molded the silences of women with their words, close quote. Das reminds herself that those who, like Sadat Hassan Manto, who tried to name it, have, quote, themselves touched madness and died in fierce regret for the loss of the radical dream of transforming India, close quote. Do most Indians then deny this supposed madness, and is that why they are unable to admit to Sikh women's rape during the 84 violence? Reema Anand, a Sikh writer and social worker, author of Scorched White Lilies of 84 Notes, quote, there were accounts of gruesome sexual assaults and the rapes committed in areas of Sultanpuri, Kalyanpuri, Mangolpuri, and Trilokpuri based on personal interviews taken by journalists and the medical records at the relief camp set up by the community and some NGOs, close quote. Anand provides many examples in her text. For example, during her work with survivors of 84 in Trilokpuri, she asked Kali, and this is like 20 years later, this book was published about a few years ago. She asked Kali, one of the, quote, toughest of them, the leader among them, and the most vociferous and fierce in her exterior demeanor, to recount her memories. Sobbing, Kali narrates the following, quote, it has been 20 years, Didi, but the nightmares don't go away. In front of my eyes, they keep seizing young girls in our group. They flash torches in our faces. They use knives to slice open the front of our shirts and cut open the cords of our salwars, which they thought were passable, even if they were young enough, young, 12, 13, close quote. Anand, who felt sick after hearing this account, narrates another woman's account of rape. Quote, Gurdeep Kaur, a 45-year-old woman, was gang raped by a group of 8 young boys of about 16 to 18 years of age in front of a 16-year-old son, close quote. There were many inquiries into the atrocities of 84, but the description of rape were missing from the reports. Quote, none of the commissioner's inquiries or journalists, except perhaps Madhu Kishwar, brought up the word rape. Even People's Union of Democratic Rights failed to mention atrocities committed on Sikh women and their young daughters, close quote. Although the Indian government and most society, quote, choose to forget close quote, sexual violence against Sikh women, a testimony such as Kali's, quote, serves as a challenge and a counter-memory to official hegemonic history, as stated by Hirsch and Smith. Was it religion that was the trigger and the excuse for violence? Was it politicized violence? How could this madness occur, particularly in regards to erasures of gender violence, especially against women? Thousands of Sikhs from 1984 to 1995 were exterminated and killed. A Sikh man with a beard and a turban who became the victims. Just skipping over some of the things we've already talked about. There's a gap between Sikhs and Indian nation state in this imaginary, in this discussion. Quote, in other words, the gendered and masculinized Amritdhari embodies a threat to the bearing forth of the nation. So one of the things that Keith Axel talks about is the feminization of the Sikh men and also torture when they would mutilate or torture or give shocks to the genitals so they won't be able to bear more children. So this masculinized Amritdhari body embodies a threat to the bearing forth of the nation's extended family, a threat indeed that any citizen may offer at any time. So any citizen was entitled to, of course, name this person as a threat. The use of the internet to portray the mutilated bodies are then transformed into Sikh survival and martyrdom. Through the technology, these images were really circulated far and wide and made it, of course, which will bring me to the book that I'm discussing, to the diaspora in Anita Rao Badami's Can You Hear the Nightbird Call? In 1984 and 1991, and Sikhs were being, after 9/11, so looking at, what happened in the diaspora right after 1984, and obviously after 9/11, the terrorists look alike in India and in the West. And jumping ahead, in the book, in the novel, the demand for Khalistan in the diaspora, and in this particular case, Canada, became clear as Dr. Randhawa, a reputed Sikh scholar and a Khalistani from England, proclaims at one of the Canadian gurdwaras that Sikhs have been, quote, cheated by Indira Gandhi, who takes wheat that we grow on our lands and distributes it to all of Hindustan, who diverts the water from our rivers to our neighboring states and leave us with empty buckets, who has ordered us to share our capital city, Chandigarh, with the Hindu state of Haryana. What we seek must do is press for separation. We demand at the point of the sword that the government of India return our Punjab to us, whole and undivided. We demand Khalistan, a land of the Sikh, the pure and the brave, a country of our own. Looking at Sikhs in the diaspora, discuss the danger of being a turbaned Sikhs in India and abroad, in India at this time. The diasporic community yearns for a return to the land of birth where they will no longer feel fragmented but complete. This was before this 84. The space they inhabit in North America is like Badami's semi-divine king Trishanku, who hangs between heaven and earth, upside down between worlds, neither here nor there. The diasporic search for home and ideas of national belonging swings between the nation of domicile, nation of birth, and space of birth. It searches for a home, for a story, for a history to belong. Quote, without history, you were nothing, a nobody, one of those fluffy seed heads floating in the summer breeze, unaware of your origin, careless of your destination, meaningless, mythless, shapeless, close quote. And to remind themselves of history, Indians in the diaspora reconstruct India and Indianness as and through myth, the myth of nationalism and freedom within a secular nation state. The main character, I'll be done. The main character, Charanjit Kaur, or BBG, immigrates to Canada after stealing her sister's potential husband. Her sister Kaur remains behind in India only to be caught in the partition violence where she is raped. So this book starts earlier, this novel starts with, what's happening and then flashes back. So I'm doing a little bit of that. And I think that violence and memory of it sort of from the 1947 to 1984 and to 1991, I think is has this going back and forth too. And subsequently, her sister who's raped, and hangs herself, this daughter who's hiding in one of the wheat bin hears that. So to me, the person with the memory is either hidden somewhere or bracketed. And it reminds me a lot of my grandmother's locked suitcases that was left in Pakistan when they had to leave in March in the middle of the night. So she talks about her locked box all the time and the things that she has. So it's always bracketed, it's always in this locked box, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more later. Years later, BBG reconnects with her sister's daughter, Nemo, and the narrative then highlights the 1984 massacre. Jyoti Garewal, in Betrayed by the Nation, the Anti-Sikh Pogroms of '84, states that recalling certain events of magnitude create memory, which in turn creates history. Yet traumatic events tend to be repressed by the polity of a nation state, especially like India, and the violent nations, as we were talking about, by the perpetrators due to denial, and by the victims due to lack of venues and space for mourning. The anti-Sikh pogroms of '84, according to Garewal, quote, were pushed into the recesses of our collective consciousness once the tumult has subsided, unquote. The systematic anti-Sikh riots that ensuing the assassination of Indira Gandhi by her Sikh bodyguards in retaliation to Operation Blue Star against Bhindranwala in Amritsar left hundreds of Sikhs dead. Including women and children, the Gurdwara was dishonored, and decade later, the decade following that, it left thousands of Sikhs dead. Move forward a little bit. How many minutes do I have? 3. All right, so, and in this, I'm going to skip over this part. So the son, this woman, BBG, she goes to India and brings Nemo's son to raise in Canada, and he eventually gets radicalized and gets become part of the 1984 riots. In the meantime, in 1984, what's going on is Nemo goes through this whole thing with the 1984 massacre and riot. Her husband and her other son are massacred. One son has to, he cuts off his hair, and which reminds me a lot of what happened to my son, but that's for another time. Maybe I'll talk about it later. And herself, what she does is so they come knocking at her door. When told where they ask for her husband and son, they drag her out, set fire to the house. But in the meantime, she has told her daughter to go into this steel cupboard, almirah, and she takes the key and she puts it aside. So the house is burnt and the girl is burned inside. And she's raped and so on and so forth. So as I was, we know how many people died during this period, but what is worth noting is the massacre of Sikh men takes place in public spaces, while the rape and murder of women, which take place in the domestic spaces of the home, are further folded back and literally placed within a sealed box and not mentioned again, signifying erasures and elision in the national memory of trauma. And so my thing is that without having narrative space to discuss issues of violence against women. Of course, this is spectacular violence, and we haven't, as Dr. Garewal was talking about, the slow violence. Where is the narrative space to talk about it? Where is memory work for such things? Because without that, the violence repressed comes out in uncanny ways. There are so many other things that occur within the home, within the family, within the community that needs narrative space, that needs to be talked about. Thank you.